And so, one of the things that, when we are going through, something that is sort of pressing on us, it's not always easy to rely on, the things that we know all the time. And so I just wanted to make that statement as we continue on in this video that, I think this comes out especially in the book of James, where, James says that we shouldn't be hearers of the word, but also doers of the word. And so it implies that, sometimes we can know certain things, we hear it and we kind of know what we are to do in certain situations. But when we're actually in certain situations, different things rise up, and it makes it hard for us to really, do the right thing, or the thing that we know to do. But God is still wanting us to do what we know what's right. And so, I think that a lot of this is a learned experience. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about why we may go through certain situations of suffering. One of the things that the Bible brings out is that because we are serving Christ in this world, we will have certain things that are troubling to us. I maybe can't think of every situation, but one of the things that, I think come from that is being amongst, people who do not believe in Jesus. For example, I just heard of and not just heard, I've heard this for a while, that in other countries like Africa, where there are certain parts of Africa that are Islamic. And so the people who believe in Islam, and hopefully I'm saying that right, because I sometimes get Islam and Muslim confused, but I think Muslim is just the ethnicity, but Islam is the religion. And so people who are Islamic, they persecute, people who are Christian. I think this is happening, in Africa, but, all over the world. But even in places like India, where, they're burning down churches and different things like that. And so that's just a simple example of some of the suffering that we can be subject to, not necessarily in the same way, depending on, I think, where we live. I think it depends on certain choices that we make. Not all of us, Jesus said that, if we are persecuted in one town, flee to another. Well, that statement may not necessarily apply to, a coworker giving you the cold shoulder. But, you may want to take that statement more seriously if, for example, you have your neighbor's house that is a Christian, burned down because of strictly they were a Christian by some Islamic person. Then you may want to, sort of move, if you're persecuting one town, flee to another. That statement may be more true in certain parts of the world. And so, I think there's different ways that we can handle suffering. I know, like I was saying in one of my podcasts, I believe that, Proverbs really talks about the importance of getting wisdom. Now, the Bible clearly says that, there's a lot of things that we just won't know here on this side of eternity, and some things we can't, some things we obviously take by faith, but then some things, even if we do think of it as right, maybe we don't have the skills or the technology to even test it to see if it is true. Some things we can sort of think of, but maybe not fully be able to, confirm it. And so there are certain things that we may not ever know, but still, one of the things that Proverbs brings out is that, we should get wisdom. Now, there are a lot of examples of different types of persecution in the Bible. The Israelites as a nation were under persecution as far as being slaves in Egypt. And so they got delivered once Moses, after 400 years. And then once Moses, was called by God, they were delivered. And so, I don't know if I can cover every single situation as far as suffering, but, I think one of the answers is, to continue to get wisdom, especially in things like spiritual warfare. Maybe there are certain parts of the armor of God in the book of Ephesians, that we have to put on. Maybe on some level we are doubting our salvation. And so there's some sort of problem that comes from that. Obviously that is the case because clearly, the helmet of salvation is one of the armors that we are to have. And so clearly God is saying if we don't have that helmet of salvation or any of the other armor, then we could be presenting ourselves to a problem, to a exposure to some sort of attack. If we don't have the belt of truth on, I look at that belt of truth in two different ways. One, having, Jesus said he is the truth. But I think also, if we don't actually literally tell the truth when we talk, we could be subject to different problems in our life. Maybe you can sort of, believe the wrong thing if you are not having that belt of truth, Jesus Christ as your anchor, Jesus Christ as, your guide of the way to live. There's different dynamics that I think going back to Proverbs of getting wisdom, these are all different things we need to learn, especially in the topic of suffering. The Bible doesn't necessarily go into great detail about some of the things that we may wonder about. I know when God spoke to Job in the book of Job, around chapters, the last part of the book, God spoke in such a way where, it didn't necessarily directly address, certain questions that Job may have had, even though God spoke in a way there that I believe, Job, got his answers in a different way. But I think for us, sort of reading, about the book of Job, we don't understand maybe why God was having a conversation with Satan in the first place. Why is God, entertaining anything from Satan? Why is there that conversation, structure going on? God didn't answer those type of questions. But, the one answer that God did give was that, God is in charge of the whole universe, of every dynamic that we don't even think of. He brought out how there's certain things that are going on in the world that don't even come to our mind, or we don't even understand really how it works. I had a thought the other day about, even though I can understand a definition of something, or I can kind of understand the general concept of something, when you actually think about it, it presents even more questions and sometimes that revelation comes where you actually really don't, understand, the whole concept. And of course, I like to give the example of a car. Sort of, you can understand a car about, it has an engine, and the wheels, and the suspension, and the different components of the car. But yet, some of the specifics about, the engine maybe, or, the transfer of energy from the engine to the wheels, some of these things we actually don't understand until maybe for the car, until you maybe read more on it, like a book or something. But, and bringing this into the concept of suffering, God has shown us that there are some things that are beyond certain understandings. For example, you can sort of see people in this world suffering in, different ways. And sometimes we don't necessarily understand, why that happens. Even reflecting on my own life, maybe there is a certain situation that I can sort of think about where I'm like, maybe I don't understand why that sort of happened in that way. Jesus was asked the question of, by the disciples. He said, when there was a man that was blind, the disciples asked Jesus, he said, Lord, was it this man's sins that, he is blind, or was it the sins of maybe his parents or someone else? And, Jesus said it wasn't either. It was so the glory of God can be, reflected from him. And then Jesus healed him. But then, we sort of look at maybe someone who is born blind today and is never healed. We can sort of ask questions. And so I think, going back to the simplicity of some of the things that God is asking us to do, is, one, to try our best to trust God and trust his plan. I think also getting wisdom on how God wants us to live out our life, so we don't necessarily make foolish choices in our life. Maybe there are certain paths in life that we should avoid, that could bring about certain suffering in our life. For example, maybe if you're in Africa or India and you're a Christian, maybe, you can look at, okay, how can I maybe move out of this area or something like that. Obviously, not everyone has that opportunity, and that's some sort of a simplistic kind of idea. But, the concept of trusting God, continuing to do what's right, and then praying. One of the things that I brought out in, my other podcast was that, continuing to pray and cast our cares on the Lord. Something that Jesus wants us to do is to endure certain things. And also, I believe, as we look at prophecy, we look at how Jesus is close to his return. We have more hope within us that God is going to wipe away every tear. God is going to work on us and bring us out of this dark world into a universe and an earth and a world of light and righteousness. And so, anyway, thanks so much for checking out this video. Hopefully this was helpful. I didn't necessarily go into some specifics on, to-do list of kind of what to do. I tried to sort of, talk about why we sometimes suffer. I wanted to use Paul as an example of how, all of the things that he went through didn't stop him from serving Christ. And now we have to trust God that, Paul is in heaven right now. When we think about it, we have to reflect on the truthfulness of the word of God, that, God brought Paul into heaven, and he's no longer suffering, and also will never be subject ever to that suffering. And so, we have that hope in God that, this life is only temporary, and God has a plan for us. And I think a lot of this ties into our faith. I think a lot of this ties into prayer, especially for us, for those of us who maybe have low faith or hard time trusting in God, or we may be weak in certain areas where, we feel like, we are subject to certain sufferings all the time. I think going to God in prayer and asking him to help us in our life, I think, asking God to help you have faith, I think we can start anywhere and God can help us. And so hopefully this was a helpful topic today on suffering. Thanks so much for checking it out, and I will talk to you on the next one. See ya.